Let's speak now to Alex Booth, Kpler head of market analysis, who's with us this morning. Alex, good to speak to you. So are you in line with, are your views in line with that view? Do you expect that OPEC Plus, OPEC and friends will stick to their plan to increase production, 400,000 barrels, I think?
Hi, good morning. Yeah, I think that's very much the case. If we look at what's happening in the physical markets at the moment, we're actually in a really quite a tight balance scenario, basically. We've seen OPEC plus exports decline quite considerably, actually, through the month of August, down just over 1 million barrels a day, largely driven actually by Saudi. Nigeria's been struggling, and also in Kazakhstan. Potentially a couple of reasons from that. We have seen higher refinery runs across the system. We have seen prolonged direct crude burn, or we think there's been a prolonged direct crude burn as the summer has remained very hot in the Middle East for longer than normal. And as say in Nigeria and in other countries in West Africa, they are struggling with increasing their production outright anyway. So we expect to see an increase in the, as you say, in the 400,000 barrel a day region, as is their plan, because ultimately the global balances are tight as well. We're seeing net crude flows, so kind of exports minus imports, shifting into a net import environment. So that's taking more crude oil off the water. And at the same time, we're seeing global onshore inventories declining slightly, and including in China as well, where we can touch upon the demand concerns that we're seeing there. So overall, I don't see any reason to change the plan as it stands now. Going forwards, we've also kicked kind of one of the major risks further along the road, and that's the amount of oil that could be coming back from Iran. If we go back a couple of months, we were talking about, okay, we could see kind of a deal coming around the sanctions once the new government was in position after the elections. That's just been completely kicked down the road, basically. So we think sticking
Alex,
to the game plan.
I want to actually ask you about that Iran issue. Assuming, since you think that OPEC Plus are going to stick to the game plan of 400,000 barrels, and that's largely priced and expected, is it the Iran news that's actually bigger for oil markets this week than possibly OPEC Plus, or is that a little bit naive?
I think the original plan with OPEC Plus accounts for or accommodates for any increase in supply with Iran. So it's really around the timing. We know that they have the ability to pause within the agreement to pause any increase in exports for a 3-month period. That should be used basically once we have a better understanding of what's going to be happening with Iranian production. So I don't think we should be seeing any surprises. I think it's the bottom line from the OPEC Plus meeting this week.
So no surprises. I mean, we sometimes get surprises, don't we, in the shape of some parts of OPEC Plus sort of holding out for a better deal for their from their perspective. So I guess we'll see if we get any of that. The bigger picture around demand, Alex, talk to us about that then, around the Delta variant, the spread of that in the US. Mark and I have been looking at high-frequency data over the last couple of days that's talked about a topping out, particularly in air travel, perhaps. There's that part of the narrative, and then there's the China narrative as well, where they've had way fewer cases, of course, but they've clamped down on them much harder, and that's limited movement. What's been the net result of all of that fight against Delta?
It's a very interesting point in that up until now, there's been a lot of concerns around Delta. This isn't new variant. It's been with us for months. We've been living with it in Europe for what seems an eternity now, and I feel that the tide is changing slightly in the US. Up until now, the demand numbers have been strong, generally good through the summer for gasoline and distillate through the driving season in the US, and kind of good economic activity as a whole in the US. What we're starting to see, though, is this swing between, unfortunately, the case rates and the mortality rates in the US, where the number of deaths are increasing quite significantly in the US compared to countries or regions such as in Europe and the UK, where there is ultimately a higher fully vaccinated population percentage, and that is really keeping a lid on that. So up until now, the activity and the demand driving demand for petroleum products in the US has been good, but I feel that we could be going into a turning point. You saw on the news just there around Google, say, delaying its opening up of its offices. I feel that narrative is going to gain momentum, and we could well see demand actually topping out here, as you say, in the US. Flipping across to Europe, actually, as I say, it's been quite resilient. There's been nowhere near the growth initially that you saw in the US, but things are gradually ticking along. When it comes to China,
Alex,
there are...
Just to jump in, just very quickly, because I just want to get your longer term view before we finish up. And I'm aware of kind of the uncertainty around this with the COVID situation. But for Brent crude, we're at $72 now roughly. Do you think it will trade at $60 first or $85 first?
Yeah, I think we're likely to see support here. I don't think we should be seeing it trading lower. In the medium term, we should be seeing, I think, this kind of 70-75 range. It's a fairly comfortable range with OPEC Plus managing that supply. Could we see any demand shock to that? Yes, but I think, as I say, the situation is being managed much more. And ultimately, we're at very low stocks as a whole on a global basis. Is it going to hit 85 first? Before 60, possibly. Do I think realistically it's going to be going up that high? Not really, or not for a good while yet, anyway.
Alex, thanks very much. Thanks for joining us. Alex Booth, Kpler head of market analysis. His thoughts on OPEC and the OPEC Plus meeting that takes place today. Coming up on this programme.